As we begin, let me just say a word of thanks to our older adult ministry group. They were the ones that really sort of birthed this whole idea for Heritage Sunday. If you are a part of that team, if you would just sort of stand where you are this morning, they may all be down toward the gym getting food ready. Sandra's part of that. Okay, well, we're making them work even more, I suppose. Yeah. But we do thank them for putting this idea together, and it took off, quite frankly, as we began. And this will be just sort of an hors d'oeuvre, because next year is the 125th anniversary, and shortly after we conclude this service this Sunday, that group is going to already begin to work, pulling together more stuff, because there's more history than we can adequately cover in the time frame that we have, as you will see in just a moment. But I also want to thank these four folks who have come. We were trying to come up with a little different idea, and somebody came up with the idea, well, let's do sort of an interview with some folks who have some significant connection here to the congregation. So that's really sort of what we're doing. I'm not going to interview them per se, but we did get together the other Thursday of this past week, and we talked together for an hour and a half. We're not going to do that this morning, just to give you a little comfort. But that just tells you we only began to scratch the surface. And after first service, someone came up and says, well, you need to mention this and this. And I said, well, we may have to put that off till the 125th anniversary. So gather your pictures and gather your story so that we'll have that material. So we won't, we'll cover as much as we can. But I want to thank Sandra Stoddard, Maurice Arnold, Liz Morton, and Bill Hawkins, who you've already seen on the video, for consenting to be a part of this portion of our worship service. As we are going to talk a little bit about some memories, I'd like to say these are some of the stones that are a part of the history of this church. Joshua had stones placed for part of the memory for Israel after they crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land. Well, these are some of our stones that are a part of the history of this congregation. And Sandra, I'm just going to begin with you a little bit this morning, because you've been here since the 5th grade.
That's right.
As I understand it.
So you can do your math and see how old I am. I was in Miss Hilda Lewis's Sunday school class and her class at Hickson Elementary, along with my friend somewhere, Judy Ploger Martin, and also Sandra Underwood Snurr and Frank Coulter Jr. were in that class. And we went on through to graduate from high school together. When the fall of 1966 began, our church established a kindergarten. They were not in public school yet, and that was headed by Joan Barnes. She taught that 1 year, and then her family moved to Signal Mountain, and it wasn't feasible for her to drive back and forth. So Charlie Peavyhouse came to her home one Sunday afternoon and asked that I might do that. I had taught first grade 4 years, and that would be a 3-hour job, and my Sean was almost a year old. So I did agree to do that, probably broke even paying his daycare and the teaching salary I made. But I did that for 3 years. We had some wonderful children and families. I'll tell you about two of my, quote, famous children. One you may know if you've been to the Hickson Paint and Decorating Center and worked with Susan Gooden about paints or wallpaper or whatever. Well, she learned her colors right here. Another, quote, famous person who didn't go to church here, his family went to Berks, but was John Vandergriff. Now, Uncle John Vandergriff gave the property that Vandergriff Park is on, and he did go to church here, and it's named in memory of Buster, who was this John's dad. John was a writer in LA for Home Improvement and some other TV shows. Through the years, the CDC has developed with more classes, more children, and a great program. I've been on the board of that several times, and we're very proud that we are the 3-star category in the state and always have good ratings. After I retired, and this job here got me ready for kindergarten, I taught 33 years at Alpine Crest Elementary, and then I was asked to do the 4-year-old class here for 2 years. That made me, having taught a total of 42 years, and since I started in first, then went to kindergarten at 4 years old, I thought I better give it up while I was ahead. But we are proud of the program as well as Highland Plaza's program. I believe they started about the same time as we did, so in about 3 years, we all will be celebrating a 50-year birthday that we need to remember.
A good celebration.
Through those years, we've gotten families here whose children were loved and cared for, so this has been a community outreach program.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you very much. Now, Maurice, your family ties go back a few generations, don't they, into
Yes,
this
sir.
church?
We came here in 1965. We were looking for a church that was a friendly church and also an active church. Of course, none of this was here then. We were at the old sanctuary, as they call it. And we were welcomed, just taken in, loved, and Preacher Burwanger was the pastor then, and Beatty Burwanger, his wife, was one of these persons, if you know her or knew her, she was very active, and she would volunteer you for a lot of things. So we started out, Shirley and myself, teaching the 4th grade, then moved up to the 5th grade, and long story short, we wound up in the youth group. Hey, if you want to stay young, hang around a bunch of young people. And we took retreats, but we didn't have the big buses and the air conditioning and all that. Then we had to gather up whoever could take a week's vacation and take their car. And so we went to South Carolina to Sullivan's Island. And that was an exciting trip at that time. Now, outside the church, one of the things that we did was feed the people on the streets. There was a place called Hope House, and it was located down on South Market, I believe. And the ladies of the church here would cook big meals, and the men would gather here in the parking lot, take it all down there, and we would have a devotional and scripture reading and a little bit of Bible study and prayer, and then we would feed the people. And they would just come in off the street and eat. And I may be mistaken, but I believe that's what turned into the community kitchen, which we now have. And this church still supports. And John Deans is sort of the coordinator, the ones that go down and work, and we have fed as high as 300 people at one time, just lunch. And another thing that we did was outside the church. You all may remember, some of you, Ned Thaxton. He owned a sporting goods store here, and he was really interested in the kids being able to play sports and play ball, those kind of things. So he and several of us got together and built these 2 fields that are directly behind the church here. And they're today named Thaxton Field. So that's another outreach for the church in the community. In 2000, one of the things that's been important to me is we started a contemporary service, which is now known as the River Service. And when we started that, we had about 25 people to start attending, and we knew it'd take a while to grow. Last Sunday and the Sunday before, we had 188. So I'm proud of that, for God's sake.
Absolutely.
And I was trying to the one real time when I saw the church come together, everybody in the church, Will Rowe, sitting right over there, called me and said, "Are you busy?" I said, "No, not right now." He said, "I need you to meet me at the church in about 20 minutes. We're going to go to the Red Cross and get 50 cots and put up in the church because Katrina had hit New Orleans and Mississippi and in that area." And so that's what we did. And the church opened its doors to these people. Excuse me. They came here with absolutely nothing. Some of them didn't even have shoes on their feet. We gave those people cards for Walmart to go buy the things that they needed. And then they started calling in volunteers to help take care of them. And everybody in this church volunteered to do something. They brought so many clothes and shoes. We had to call them and say, "Don't bring any more. We don't have anywhere to put it." And I guess that was one of the best times for this church to come together.
Right.
And there's a lot of other things that go on that I'd like to mention. Operation Christmas Child. The making of the shoe boxes for the children overseas who also have nothing. And Will and I work together in that a lot. And then the Shoes for Orphan Souls, which Jack Williams and Ed promote. And we've just finished a thing on that, getting all the shoes together for the people who have children that have no shoes. And my prayer is that we can continue to do this kind of work. Amen. To glorify Jesus. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, people have mentioned to me, Maurice, that probably Katrina and the response was a turning point in kind of the missional life of this church. It really took on a whole different character to it
Seems that point. Everybody got involved.
Yeah. Now, Liz, I know you've been around here for a while. And you brought a book and you've got cards. You're ready.
Now, how long do I have?
Well,
I have prepared many cards. Trust me, I can't possibly use all of them. But I do have a very important thing to tell this congregation. I have a book here. Some of you have a copy of this, and this says 1889 to 1989. We celebrated our 100th anniversary in this spot in 1989. And it was a wonderful, wonderful celebration. And before we decided to get going on that celebration, I thought, well, we needed some kind of something to tell the people about our community and our church. There were two ladies who belonged to this church that I give great honor to. One of them was Miss Luella Hickson, who lived right up this street, and her house is right back from the street. That's where the Hicksons lived. When we built this building, we paid for different things, and the Hicksons had paid for the pew number 6, and nobody sat on that pew but Miss Luella and Mr. Bob. At this end, she would let them sit at that end. One night, I remember the young people were here, and she said, they have to sit down there. This is mine and Bob's place. But Miss Luella was a historian, and then Miss Susie Hamill Smith was a great, great lady. Miss Susie was, by the way, this is beside the church, she was the first lady in Hickson to own and operate a car. She told me that when she went to Chattanooga and bought the car, she drove it home. That was the first time she'd ever driven. That's the truth. By the way, I have that on tape if anybody. But she was a great, great lady. She worked downtown and then she volunteered over here. But she had a penchant for wanting to keep all of the history of Hickson in Hickson, especially this church. And she and Miss Luella Hickson did the history. They kept all kinds of records. They would talk to people. They would get clippings from papers, check deeds. They did everything. And then early on, they decided that they needed to put their history together. By the way, Miss Susie lived over here on Winding Lane. She lived in the same house all of her life. People bought the property, but with the understanding that she and Mr. Willis could live in that house as long as one of them lived. She only lived it 2 years at Sequoia. She lived to be 101 years old. Now, Miss Luella and Miss Susie, when we were having this celebration, we went to them and asked them if they could help us with the history of this church. A lot of us didn't know anything much about it, and they gave us everything that either one of them had. Mrs. Marjorie Fusell was the historian at that time, and we wanted to do something, so she got up a committee of several people, and we took everything that those two ladies had. We had a church secretary down here, and we had girls to come in. They typed everything from morning to night. And one of our wonderful members, Clayton Burton, we thought, well, how are we going to get this thing printed? We needed a new copy machine, and I talked Clayton into bringing one out here and letting us use it to copy this thing. And I said, we may buy it later, which we did. But Clayton put all of that together, and then he even said, Liz, how you going to put it together? I said, I don't know. He even put this in for us. The day we had the celebration in 1989, we sold these books for $5. I don't think there are any more. But we even have at the back of it, which really wasn't history, I guess, we even had all of the accounts of the church. We could tell you what Al Bowles' salary was when he was here. if you're interested.
That's as far as it goes. Stop that.
As a matter of fact, Al Bowles was here when we did all this. But I want you to know, this to me is a real treasure. And I hope sometime soon that somebody in the church will do these books again. You don't have to do all that and print their salaries and stuff like that. But all of the history of the church, it is so interesting how far we have come. Now, there's one thing that my children grew up over in the chapel. They were gone by the time the sanctuary here was done. And that has always been a very, very special place for me. And outside, I don't know how many of you have ever paid any attention to the cornerstone over there. Some of you, I'm sure you have looked at it. I would hope you had. And it says on it, M.E. Church South. You know what the South means? Well, we had the M.E. Church North, separated during the Civil War, and we finally got together in 1939 and just became the Methodist Church, M.E. Church. Oh, there it says M.E. Church South, 1930. And Reverend Ulm, ULM, was the pastor, has all that. I found out that in that cornerstone over there is a little copper box, and it contains a Bible, Chattanooga Times, a copy of the Chattanooga Times, some coins, the history of this church, and all of the big people who were on the building committee. And a man who was a member of our church and was a brick mason, Elmer Marsh, sealed it up. If you drive down Old Hickson Pike, you will see Elmer Marsh's house there. It's a brick house on Old Hickson Pike. And he worked on that church. And many men here, I've heard that Tommy Hinch even worked on that also. But those are some interesting things about this church. I might tell you something funny too. I thought I wouldn't, but I guess I will anyhow. This was years ago. We only had the chapel over there, and I had to come to the church one afternoon. I parked in front, and I came up the steps and heard the organ playing. And I thought, who's in there playing the organ at this time of day? Well, I opened the door, and I saw this kid up there playing the organ, had on a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. And I thought, well, I need to find out who he is. I don't know him. I walked up the right side there, got up to the chancel rail, and I said, I'm Liz Morton, how are you? He jumped off of that organ pew and came down and grabbed my hand. He said, I'm delighted to know you, Liz Morton. I'm John Bacon, your new preacher. And we loved him, even if he was a kid.
Well, I know Liz could go on and on, but that's...
I'll put my cards away right now.
But that's a good thing, because she's a treasure for just her wit and her wisdom about the history of this church and life here in Hickson.
And by the way, there's only one member of this church older than I am, and that's Mary McDonald, who is
And
up
she's
at
at
Sequoia.
Sequoia, yeah, Mary. Well, Bill, we got a glimpse of you on the video, but I know you've got another comment or two you'd like to share with us.
That's probably all that anybody would like to see. You'll notice he referred to us as rocks. You've heard us dumb as a doorknob. So I guess there's something to that. You know, knowing that these that come before, and I look out there and I know quite a number of you that have been here a lot longer than I have, and we are talking about heritage. I knew that we were going to hear some of these wonderful stories and background and history. And this kind of goes away from what we talked about Thursday, so I'm just throwing you a curve. I did something that most of you don't even know that I could do. And, I looked up the meaning of heritage. Some of you are going to say, did you Google it up? No, I didn't Google it or doodle it, or I just went to the dictionary. That's what else. That's what us old codgers do. I don't know that other stuff. But I looked up heritage, and as you would assume, it comes from inheritance. It says heritage. And I wrote it down on an envelope. That's another thing old codgers do. They just write it down wherever you can find it. Go away and you'll know you can go back and find it, and you never do. But anyhow, heritage, that which is inherited. Possessions, etc., and so forth, such as a home, property, a collection of some type, money. 2, cultural tradition. Yeah, heritage is a cultural tradition. Underneath that, it says it's handed down from past times. That sounds good. And it has underneath that the Bible. I was glad to see that, the Bible. Underneath that is the Israelites, and they're being the chosen people. Then it came to the Christians, and nothing was under that. Now, we've got a heritage. I was amazed that there was nothing under that. Now, all of these things before that, you've got to die to leave somebody something. You've got to die before you leave somebody an inheritance, leave them a heritage. Well, maybe there's something to that. Somebody died to leave us our heritage. You know who that is? Jesus Christ died for our inheritance, for our heritage. Most of the time we call it our faith. You know when it started? That heritage started when Jesus arose. When those disciples realized that he was who he said he was, and that he was going to do what he said he was going to do, and has done. That's when it started. And the minute they realized that, they didn't wait till they died to give it to somebody. They went out like fire, like the flames on that cross. They went out to tell somebody else, to tell everybody they could. And they lived it. They didn't just talk about it, they lived it. That's the heritage that we have. That's the heritage you, and me. That's the heritage that we need to share. That's the heritage that we have got to live. We have got to tell everybody about what we do, what we say, how we live, how we love, how we share in the good times and the bad times. That's our heritage. That's our faith. That's the reason we're here. If we didn't have that, we'd be someplace else. We'd be in a movie or something maybe. But that is heritage. And that's what this church is about, the church being the people. And I'm so thankful to be a part of it. Thank the Lord.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Liz and Maurice and Sandra, for participating. As I said, these are some of our stones. When the story is told out of the book of Joshua that they crossed the river and they set up the memorial stones, it seemed to have at least two purposes. One was so they would not forget where they had come from, their history, being slaves in Egypt, wandering around in the wilderness, and finally the fulfillment of God's promise to them that they would enter into a promised land. But the second major purpose was geared to the future. Because Joshua said, when the children come and they ask the question about this pile of rocks here, we want to tell them the story so that it will become their story. We were intentional about having the children here in our midst today. Sometimes they're off in children's church doing their own thing. But we wanted them to be here to be a part of the story. And I think it was very symbolic and significant that we had a baptism for little Pierce this morning as a part of that, of another generation that is coming along. So while we celebrate our past, we also remember God is directing us to a future as we have gathered as the people of God